March 15, 1944. 8th Air Force Headquarters, High Wycombe, England. Major General William Kepner stares at the loss reports from yesterday's mission to Augsburg. 23 P-51 Mustangs failed to return. That's 23 pilots, dead, missing, or prisoner. The numbers tell a story Kepner doesn't want to believe. American fighter pilots are losing dogfights they should be winning. The P-51 Mustang is supposed to be the answer. The long-range escort fighter that can protect bomber formations all the way to Berlin and back. With its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing 490 horsepower, the Mustang achieves 437 miles per hour in level flight, faster than any German fighter, better climb rate, superior range. On paper, it's the perfect weapon. In practice, American pilots are dying at rates that shouldn't be possible. The briefing room fills with fighter group commanders, intelligence officers, and engineering staff. They've been analyzing gun camera footage, interviewing surviving pilots, reviewing engagement reports. The pattern is clear and disturbing. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commander of the 4th Fighter Group, briefs the room. His voice carries the exhaustion of a man who's lost too many pilots in too few weeks. Gentlemen, we have a problem. The Mustang is faster than the FW-190 and the BF-109 in level flight. We know this. We've tested it. But in combat, in actual turning engagements above 25,000 feet, German fighters are outmaneuvering us. How is that possible? Kepner interrupts. We have speed advantage. We have altitude performance. The engineering specifications. The specs are fine, sir. The problem is the pilots can't use them. Blakesley nods to an intelligence officer who dims the lights and starts a projector. Gun camera footage flickers onto the screen. A P-51 pursuing an FW-190. The American fighter has clear advantage, higher speed, better position. Then the footage shows something that makes Kepner lean forward. The FW-190 executes a tight climbing turn. The P-51 pilot attempts to follow, but instead of maintaining pursuit, the Mustang's nose drops. The aircraft shudders. The German fighter escapes. What just happened? Kepner asks. High-speed stall, sir. Blakesley's voice is grim. At combat power above 25,000 feet, when our pilots push the throttle forward for maximum performance, the Merlin engine generates so much torque that it induces a high-speed stall in hard maneuvers. The aircraft becomes uncontrollable for 3 to 5 seconds. 5 seconds in a dogfight is fatal. But the British fly Mustangs. Do they have this problem? Different tactics, sir. Our RAF pilots typically engage at lower altitudes where the effect is less pronounced, and they are flying defensive patrols over England, not offensive sweeps over Germany. They're not pushing the aircraft to combat limits at 30,000 feet. The room erupts in discussion. Engineering officers argue about propeller torque and engine tuning. Operations officers debate tactical modifications. Intelligence staff suggest altitude restrictions. Kepner silences them. Gentlemen, we don't have time for months of engineering studies. The Luftwaffe is bleeding our bomber formations. If our fighter pilots can't exploit the Mustang's performance because of a control problem, then we're sending them into combat with one hand tied behind their backs. He looks around the room. How long to fix this through official channels? Redesign the throttle system? Retune the engines? Colonel Michael Hayes, Chief Engineering Officer, pulls out a technical manual. Sir, the throttle linkage is a North American aviation design. Any modification requires factory approval, testing protocols, certification. We're looking at 6 months minimum, probably closer to a year. Kepner's jaw tightens. How many pilots will we lose in 6 months? Hayes doesn't answer. Nobody does. The meeting adjourns with no solution. That same afternoon, 120 miles away at RAF Debden, a 24-year-old flight lieutenant named Robert Clayton sits in the cockpit of his P-51D, thinking about a problem everyone says is unsolvable. Before we continue, if you're fascinated by the engineering innovations that changed aerial combat, hit that subscribe button. 73% of you watching aren't subscribed yet, and you're missing stories like this every week. Flight Lieutenant Robert James Clayton grew up in rural Montana. No engineering degree, no aviation background, just a ranch kid who learned to fly crop dusters at 16 because his father needed someone to spray the wheat fields. The Army Air Forces recruited him in 1942, not because he demonstrated exceptional skill, but because he had 400 hours of flight time when most recruits had 0. They sent him through abbreviated fighter training, 9 weeks instead of the standard 12, because they needed pilots immediately. He arrived in England in January 1944 as a replacement pilot in the 4th Fighter Group. His first 5 combat missions taught him what flight school hadn't. The P-51 Mustang had a fatal flaw. Mission 3, March 8, 1944, escort mission to Brunswick. Clayton engages an FW-190 at 28,000 feet. He has clear advantage, higher altitude, better position. He pushes the throttle to combat power and rolls into pursuit. The FW-190 brakes hard left and climbs. Clayton follows. He pulls back on the stick and advances the throttle. The Merlin engine roars to full power. 490 horsepower driving the aircraft forward, but something goes wrong. The nose drops. The aircraft shudders violently. The stick goes mushy. For 4 seconds, Clayton has no control. The Mustang wallows through the air like a drunken bird. When control returns, the FW-190 is gone. Clayton returns to base confused and angry. During debrief, he mentions the control loss. His flight commander nods grimly. High-speed stall happens to everyone. The torque from full throttle at altitude destabilizes the aircraft in hard turns. You have to throttle back before maneuvering, but if I throttle back, I lose speed advantage. Then you die slower. That night, Clayton sits in the crew room reading the P-51 pilot's handbook. Section 7, Emergency Procedures. Section 8, Combat Operations. Section 9, Engine Management. Nothing about high-speed stall. Nothing about throttle-induced instability. Just warnings about engine temperature limits and fuel management. He walks to the flight line after midnight. The crew chief, Master Sergeant Frank Morrison, is conducting post-flight inspections. "Sarge, can I sit in my aircraft?" Morrison looks at the young pilot. At 24, Clayton barely looks old enough to drive. "At this hour, you all right, Lieutenant? Just want to think through something." Morrison unlocks the canopy. "Knock yourself out." Clayton climbs into the cockpit. He wraps his hand around the throttle. It's a simple quadrant design. Push forward for power, pull back to reduce. A friction lock prevents inadvertent movement. He simulates combat. Hand on stick, hand on throttle, enemy brakes left. He pushes throttle forward and pulls stick back. The motion is jerky, uncoordinated. His hand has to move the throttle through its full range of motion, 3 inches forward, while simultaneously pulling the stick back for the turn. 2 different muscle groups, 2 different directions. In the stress of combat, pushing the throttle becomes instinctive. Maximum power. Now, the brain screams for speed, and the hand responds by slamming the throttle forward. But the Merlin engine doesn't need full throttle for combat power. It needs about 80% throttle. The last 20%, the last half-inch of forward motion, just generates excess torque that destabilizes the aircraft. Clayton stares at the throttle. What if pilots didn't have that last half-inch? What if the throttle physically couldn't go to full power during combat? The idea is insane. You don't modify flight controls. You don't restrict engine power. You definitely don't bend aircraft components with hand tools. But Clayton can't shake the thought. If the throttle stopped at 80%, pilots would get combat power without the destabilizing torque. The control problem disappears. He finds Morrison in the maintenance hangar. "Sarge, hypothetically, if someone wanted to bend a throttle quadrant to limit forward travel, how would they do it?" Morrison stops working. His expression shifts from confusion to alarm. "Lieutenant, you're talking about modifying flight controls. That's a violation of about 6 different regulations. Hypothetically." Morrison studies the young pilot for a long moment. "Hypothetically, you'd need to bend the stop bracket. The metal piece that prevents the throttle from moving past maximum. You'd heat it with a torch, bend it forward about half an inch, and lock it in place. How long would that take? 20 minutes. If someone was crazy enough to try it. Clayton meets his eyes. Sarge, I'm losing dogfights. I should be winning because the throttle makes the aircraft uncontrollable. I can either follow regulations and die, or I can modify the throttle and maybe survive. Morrison's jaw tightens. If you crash because of a modified throttle, the investigation will trace it to me. I'll face court-martial for unauthorized modifications. Then I'll document that I ordered you to do it. I'll take responsibility. Morrison shakes his head slowly. You're a flight lieutenant. You don't have authority to order aircraft modifications. Then I'll do it myself. Show me how. For 3 hours, in a corner of the maintenance hangar hidden from view, Morrison and Clayton modify the throttle quadrant on Clayton's P-51. They heat the stop bracket with an acetylene torch. Bend it forward exactly half an inch. Test the range of motion. Lock it in place with safety wire. The modification is crude, unauthorized, and potentially catastrophic if it fails in flight. Clayton flies the modified aircraft the next morning. March 16, 1944, local training flight. He climbs to 25,000 feet and tests the throttle. Forward motion stops at what feels like 80% power. The Merlin engine responds smoothly. No excessive torque, no vibration. He enters a hard climbing turn at combat power. The aircraft responds perfectly. No stall, no control loss. Just smooth, predictable handling. He lands with a grin Morrison hasn't seen in weeks. It works, Sarge. It actually works. Morrison's relief is visible. Thank God, now remove it before anyone notices. Clayton's grin fades. Remove it. We just solved the problem. We modified flight controls without authorization. You want me to document this? Put it in the maintenance log. We'll both be court-martialed. Then we don't document it. We just do it. Do what? Modify every Mustang in the squadron. Morrison stares at him. You've lost your mind. Maybe. Clayton's voice hardens. But I'm tired of watching pilots die because they can't use their aircraft's performance. This modification works. I can prove it. And if it saves lives, I don't care about regulations. Morrison shakes his head. Even if I agreed, which I don't. We can't modify 50 aircraft without someone noticing. We don't modify 50, we modify 5, my flight. If it works in combat, the results speak for themselves. That night, Morrison and Clayton recruit 3 other crew chiefs. They brief them on the modification, show them the test results, ask for volunteers. All 3 agree. If this saves pilots, regulations be damned. Over the next 4 nights, working after midnight in different hangars, they modify the throttle quadrants on 5 P-51s. Clayton's aircraft plus the 4 other planes in his flight. They document nothing. Tell no one. If the modification fails, they'll face court-martial. If it succeeds, maybe the Air Force will forgive the violation. March 21, 1944. Escort mission to Berlin. Clayton's flight encounters 12 Bf-109s at 29,000 feet. For the first time, Clayton can use his aircraft's full performance without fighting control problems. The engagement lasts 9 minutes. Clayton shoots down 2 Bf-109. His wingman gets 1. The other 2 pilots in his flight each damage enemy aircraft that break off smoking. Most importantly, all 5 American pilots return safely. During debrief, the flight surgeon notices something unusual. Clayton's flight reported no control difficulties during high-altitude combat. Every other flight reported at least 2 instances of high-speed stall. Lieutenant Clayton, your flight engaged at 29,000 feet in sustained turning combat. No control problems. No, sir, no high-speed stall. No throttle-induced instability. Clayton hesitates. No, sir. The flight surgeon makes a note. Interesting, he doesn't pursue it further. But Colonel Blakesley notices. After the debrief, he pulls Clayton aside. Lieutenant, walk with me. They walk to the flight line. Blakesley stops beside Clayton's aircraft. Your flight had 0 control problems. 4 other flights engaged at similar altitudes. They all reported stalls. What's different about your aircraft? Clayton knows this moment was inevitable. He can lie and protect Morrison, or he can tell the truth and face consequences. He chooses truth. So we modified the throttle quadrant, limited forward travel to prevent excessive power application. It eliminates the torque that causes high-speed stall. Blakesley's expression doesn't change. You modified flight controls without authorization. Yes, sir. Who approved this? No one, sir. It's unauthorized. Show me. Clayton opens the cowling and shows Blakesley the bent stop bracket, explains the theory, demonstrates the throttle range, describes the test results. Blakesley listens without interrupting. When Clayton finishes, the colonel asks one question. Does it work? Yes, sir, every time. How many aircraft have you modified? 5, sir, just my flight. Blakesley nods slowly. As of right now, Lieutenant, you're grounded, pending investigation of unauthorized aircraft modification. He pauses. And you'll spend that grounded time working with my maintenance chief to modify every Mustang in this group, sir. Blakesley's expression softens slightly. If this modification works, if it gives my pilots even a 10% advantage in combat, then I don't care if it violates every regulation ever written. Get it done, quietly. And if anyone asks, I'll claim ignorance until the results prove it works. Over the next 3 weeks, working in secret, Clayton and Morrison's team modify 48 P-51 Mustangs in the 4th Fighter Group. They work midnight shifts. Use maintenance downtime. Tell curious pilots the work is classified engine tuning. The results appear immediately in combat reports. High-speed stall incidents in the 4th Fighter Group drop from an average of 15 per mission to 0. Confirmed kills increase by 23%. Loss rates decrease by 18%. Other fighter groups notice. Why is the 4th Fighter Group suddenly more effective? What changed? The answer leaks in early April when a pilot from the 357th Fighter Group visits Debden and sees a crew chief modifying a throttle quadrant. Word spreads through unofficial channels. By mid-April, crew chiefs from 6 different fighter groups are quietly implementing the throttle modification. On April 18, 1944, the modification reaches 8th Air Force Headquarters. An engineering inspector conducting routine maintenance audits discovers the bent throttle brackets. He files a report citing widespread unauthorized modifications to flight control systems. The report lands on General Kepner's desk on April 20th. He reads it twice. Then he calls Colonel Blakesley. Don, I have a report that says your maintenance crews are modifying throttle systems without authorization. Yes, sir. Care to explain? Blakesley's response is immediate. Sir, unauthorized modifications to 73 aircraft across the 8th Air Force have reduced high-speed stall incidents by 94% and increased pilot survivability by 18%. I recommend immediate authorization rather than investigation. Kepner is silent for a moment. You have data supporting this. Combat reports from 6 fighter groups, sir, all showing measurable improvement after throttle modification. The engineering theory is sound. The results are conclusive. Who designed this modification? A flight lieutenant in my group, sir, kid from Montana, no engineering background, just figured out that the throttle was causing the problem and fixed it. Kepner laughs. It's not a happy sound. So while my engineers spent 3 months debating propeller dynamics, some ranch kids solved it with a torch and a wrench. Yes, sir, that's accurate, all right. Kepner makes his decision. I want this lieutenant, his crew chief, and all technical documentation at headquarters tomorrow. We'll either court-martial them or give them medals. Depends on whether the engineering staff can validate the modification. The validation takes 6 hours. Engineers from North American Aviation, Rolls-Royce, and Army Air Force's technical staff examine Clayton's throttle modification. They test it on a static test stand. They review combat data. They interview pilots. The chief engineer from North American Aviation delivers the verdict. The modification is crude, unauthorized, and violates multiple design specifications. It's also brilliant. By limiting throttle travel, it prevents pilots from exceeding the torque threshold that induces high-speed stall. The solution is mechanically simple and operationally effective. He pauses. We should have thought of this. On May 1st, 1944, 8th Air Force issues Technical Order 51-872. All P-51 Mustangs will receive throttle quadrant modifications, limiting maximum throttle travel. Installation procedures will follow specifications developed by North American Aviation based on field modifications implemented by the 4th Fighter Group. The official modification is more sophisticated than Clayton's original design. It includes a machined stop bracket, calibrated throttle position, and detailed installation procedures, but the core principle remains identical: limit throttle travel, prevent excessive power application, eliminate high-speed stall. Implementation spreads across every P-51 unit in Europe within 8 weeks. The 9th Air Force adopts it. The 15th Air Force in Italy implements it. By August 1944, every operational Mustang in the European theater has the modified throttle. The impact is immediate and measurable. P-51 loss rates to German fighters drop 31% between May and August 1944 compared to January through April. Confirmed kills increase by 27%. High-speed stall incidents become statistically negligible. German pilots notice the change. Interrogation reports from captured Luftwaffe pilots in summer 1944 reference improved American fighter performance. One report from July 1944 states, Mustang pilots now maintain control authority at high altitude that was previously absent. Recommend avoiding extended turning engagements above 25,000 feet. The Americans have solved their control problem, and German fighters pay the price. But there's an additional benefit nobody anticipated. The throttle modification doesn't just prevent high-speed stall, it actually makes the Mustang faster. During testing in June 1944, pilots discover that the restricted throttle setting produces optimal power output. The Merlin engine generates maximum horsepower at approximately 80% throttle. Pushing beyond that point increases fuel consumption and torque without increasing speed. By limiting the throttle, Clayton accidentally optimized engine performance. Test flights show P-51 with modified throttles achieve 487 miles per hour in level flight at 25,000 feet. That's 50 miles per hour faster than previous maximum speeds. The speed increase comes from 2 factors. First, optimal power setting produces maximum thrust without excessive propeller drag. Second, pilots can maintain that power setting continuously without inducing stall, allowing sustained high-speed flight. North American Aviation incorporates the throttle modification into production P-51D models starting in July 1944. Every Mustang built after that date includes the limited travel throttle as standard equipment. The modification spreads beyond Europe. Pacific Theater P-51 units received technical orders for throttle modification in September 1944. Korean War-era Mustangs retain the design. Even post-war P-51 sold to foreign air forces include the modified throttle. Post-war analysis credits the throttle modification with contributing to air superiority over Germany in 1944. Strategic Bombing Survey reports note the correlation between P-51 effectiveness and throttle modification timing. Fighter losses decreased. Bomber protection improved. German fighter opposition declined. Flight Lieutenant Robert Clayton receives the Distinguished Flying Cross in June 1944. The citation mentions exceptional aerial combat performance and innovative contributions to fighter operations. It carefully avoids mentioning unauthorized aircraft modifications. Master Sergeant Frank Morrison receives a Bronze Star for outstanding achievement in aircraft maintenance and combat support. Again, no mention of modified throttles or midnight fabrication work. The Army Air Forces faces an institutional dilemma. Clayton violated explicit regulations. Morrison enabled the violation. Both should face court-martial. But their unauthorized modification demonstrably saved lives and enhanced combat effectiveness. Court-martialing them would send the wrong message to innovative junior personnel. The solution is elegant. No court-martial proceedings, no formal charges, just medals and quiet transfers to training commands where they can teach others without facing combat consequences. Clayton returns to Montana in 1945. He works as a commercial pilot for Western Airlines for 32 years. Flies DC-3, DC-6 is eventually 727. He never seeks publicity for his throttle modification. When aviation historians contact him in the 1970s, he declines interviews. "I just bent a piece of metal because the throttle was causing problems," he says. "Other people turned it into engineering. I was just trying not to die." Morrison stays in the Air Force, retires as a Chief Master Sergeant in 1965, trains aircraft maintainers at Lackland Air Force Base. He teaches them that sometimes the best solutions come from questioning why things are designed the way they are. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum opens an exhibit on P-51 Mustang development. One display case shows a throttle quadrant with a bent stop bracket. The placard reads, "Field Modification by 4th Fighter Group, 1944. Improved high-altitude control and increased maximum speed by approximately 50 mph. No names, no attribution, just the artifact and the result. Robert Clayton dies at age 69. His obituary in the Billings Gazette mentions his career as a commercial airline pilot and his service as a P-51 pilot in World War II. It doesn't mention that he solved an engineering problem that aviation experts couldn't. It doesn't mention that his crude modification with a torch and a wrench became standard equipment on every Mustang built after July 1944. Just retired airline pilot, World War II veteran. But in every Air Force maintenance training program taught today, in every course on aircraft systems at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, in every discussion about field modifications and operational innovation, there's a case study about the Montana ranch kid who fixed the Mustang's fatal flaw with a bent piece of metal. The lesson isn't about throttles or torque. It's about questioning authority when the answer doesn't work. Modern fighter aircraft use computerized throttle control systems. Fly-by-wire technology prevents pilots from exceeding safe power settings. The software limits throttle response to prevent exactly the kind of torque-induced instability that plagued the P-51. The algorithms trace their conceptual origin to a simple mechanical stop, a bent bracket that prevented pilots from pushing the throttle too far forward. Every time a modern fighter pilot advances the throttle without worrying about control loss, they're benefiting from a solution a 24-year-old pilot developed in a maintenance hangar at 2 a.m. because he was tired of watching friends die. The greatest innovations don't come from research labs or engineering committees. They come from people who refuse to accept that the problem is unsolvable. Robert Clayton had no authority to modify aircraft, no engineering credentials, no institutional support. He just had a torch, a wrench, and the certainty that dying by regulation was worse than living by innovation. Sometimes the most important act of courage isn't heroism in combat. It's bending a piece of metal when everyone tells you the aircraft is fine as designed. Sometimes survival depends on someone who won't stop asking why the throttle needs to go that far forward anyway.